Morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition, here to give y'all our quick update on what went down last night during the contract negotiations between the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers and Minneapolis Public Schools. How are you doing this morning, Heather?
Good. I'm going to say I am feeling the fatigue of the kickoff of the Minneapolis Public Schools prep for the school year. I'm sure our teachers and staff are feeling the same fatigue, as are you.
Yes, I'm feeling it, and I can only imagine what that means for our school staff and also for parents and who are getting ready for their students to go back to school and students just thinking about like I have 2 weeks left of summer. Let's see what I can fit in. So, but also very excited to see the kickoff of this school year, and I think everyone's also planning for a better school year than the last, and so I think that leads us into our contract negotiation from last night. And so, just as a quick review of what was discussed last night. Last night it was only a 1 hour negotiation session. It was supposed to be two. For whatever reason, it got cut down to one, and they were supposed to be talking about the COVID MOA again, and then they were also supposed to be talking about teachers of color. There wasn't enough time to talk about teachers of color because there was only 1 hour for negotiations, and they wanted to prioritize COVID, and so that's what they ended up doing. And they ended up discussing it with us being less than 2 weeks away from our first day of school. So with that, I turn it over to Heather to share her first takeaway from last night's negotiation session.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we really realized last night was that we don't necessarily have a plan that we can put in writing that we can agree upon on a policy level. I think there's a difference between talking about a plan and having best intentions and being willing, MPS being willing to sign it into a policy that then therefore they are held accountable to. Um, so we don't know what's going to happen, or for sure, we can't promise that teachers aren't going to be teaching simultaneous teaching. That if a group of students gets quarantined and they have to be home for 10 to 14 days, that the MFT really wanted the district to say in writing last night, like, look, that teacher is not going to be responsible for that in-person group of students and that group of students who's quarantining. And what we heard from the district last night was like, we want that to be true, but we don't know if we can make that true because we have massive staffing shortages and we just don't know what this year is going to bring.
Right. I think that's the challenge is, we know that, at the beginning of the summer, we were all hoping that we'd be in a much better place when it came to the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And I recognize and I know we cannot run a district and a system based on hope. Like we have to be planning for like the worst things to happen. But I don't know also how much capacity that the district actually had in order to, like plan for this level of a pandemic coming back, or this wave of the pandemic coming back, on top of all the movement of teachers over the last summer, and all the changes coming around academics and magnet programming and all this stuff. Like I think it was just a lot, and also to close out last school year I think was a lot too. And so I'm not trying, I like, we have to hold our district leadership and our system to higher standards, and also like I think we have to recognize that I don't know who was going to be the one doing the planning. And also we know that I think last night we heard the union president Greta Callahan say like, look, we should have been planning all along. But we know that there were issues even in contract negotiations around planning, because there was the unfair labor practice charge that was in place, and so it made the district feel like they can't be talking about that during negotiations while the charge was in place, and the union did not agree. But that was a barrier, and so no one was willing to budge. No one was willing to the union wasn't willing to pull back on their labor charge, and the district was unwilling to budge and saying like, let's talk about this while the charge is in place. And so like there's so many different things and so many different decisions or ways to mitigate this that could have been handled so that there was a plan. And again, district leadership is on the hook for needing to create a strong plan to protect students and staff, but it just wasn't there. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Heather?
I mean, I think, you kind of named it, that we really just don't have, these two groups of people are not coming together with what appears to me like a solid kind of consciousness of like, okay, we have to hold a lot of tensions and they aren't agreed on priorities at all, right? I mean, you kind of talked about this, like at the end of the day, we have a group of students that need a quality educational experience, and we have to balance that inside of health and safety of teachers, and it doesn't feel like we're there.
Right. And so that's what my take one of my biggest takeaways from last night was is that there is like they are not in a place together to identify what is the priority, right? Like is the
Yep.
priority like managing the health and safety of our students and our staff, or is it the education and the academic support of our students? And that is a really difficult tension that no one should have had to like figure out, but that's what a pandemic does. It like totally throws out everything that we hold true and sacred and all the norms that we just assume. And it makes us, go into this really difficult place of learning and teaching and like just operating in society. And so I think that was what's really frustrating is I don't know if they're ever going to even get to the place of saying, hey, like, how do we actually see these priorities? Because we know both things are important. What are we going to prioritize? How are we willing to manage risk in each category so that one or the other becomes the thing that we can actually have a great conversation about? Because they're talking about simultaneous learning. They're talking about the amount of time that someone's out for quarantining. They're talking about, the type of materials that are given and are in place. And like it just seems like they are holding different things like in values, right? And so if they just figure it out and align on those values, they could easily figure out some of these solutions. But they can't even agree on what time they're going to meet. Like they're supposed to be meeting from either 5 to 7 or 6 to 8 last night, and they only ended up meeting from 6 to 7 because they couldn't agree on a 2 hour time to actually talk about this in a full way and come to some type of agreement. And so I think that's really frustrating. And I just don't know if there's enough trust or willingness to actually work together in good faith to come to strong agreements. And so that is frustrating. That is really hard to see. And at the end of the day, our students suffer because of it.
And I think that kind of brings me to the other thing that I really wanted to talk about and highlight, which is that last night during the conversation, the thing that was not explicitly named was that we really need to be proactively working on meeting the needs of students of color. We saw this sort of play out as students came back into the building in the spring, that white and or privileged parents and schools that were predominantly white and in southwest part of the city were the ones that had highest attendance, and there was a lot of demand, and those were the students who were coming back in person faster. And what I worry about is that without explicitly naming that in this system that we think is going to have massive shortages, without explicitly naming that we are going to prioritize students of color, that we aren't talking specifically about the needs of the kiddos in those 15 racially isolated schools, if they aren't front and center in that conversation, I worry that they're going to be forgotten about and or be the afterthought, which is what we know put us in this position in the first place. I'm really disappointed that students of color were not the part of the conversation, even in my robocalls from the district talking about, hey, like a week ago I got this call, you need to expect bus delays, and we have a bus driver shortage. But if we aren't prioritizing students of color who are on those buses, and we aren't explicitly naming that we need white and or privileged families to come into this school year aware of these shortages and thinking about those who have the biggest needs, I really worry about that for this year.
Yeah. And I think there's like a very easy way that conversation could and should be taking place in contract negotiations too. And they
That's
could
right.
have been having a conversation last night around like, look, how are we going to support especially our most vulnerable students, our most deeply impacted students from this pandemic? And that didn't seem like, again, a place where like either side was willing to budge, right? Like it felt like, Union President Callahan was just trying to figure out like, look, they're trying to raise the urgency around we need this answer now. And like you could see that in the comments that there teachers who were really supportive of that. We could see on the screen that people were like, like very happy to see how well they're represented, I guess. but that's great that they're really well represented. But what about our students? And then same for Senior Officer Sullivan. Like, I don't know what Senior Officer Sullivan and like the district's negotiating team is, how they're working on also trying to prioritize the most vulnerable in the context of the negotiation. Like, that has to be like the center of the conversation. It can't just be like, I win, you lose, or like, I'll give up this and you give up this. Like, how are students going to win at the end of the day? How are students of color going to win at the end of the day? And like, by giving them all of it, by giving them the safety and health conditions that they deserve, and by giving them the academic support by the teachers and the ESPs and everyone else that needs to be in the building to support them adequately so that we can recover from what decimated us over the last 18 months already. So I just don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, and also like and also the leaving of students of color um to the end of the conversation, or we know we talk about this all the time, right? If the results of the policy, if the results of the conversation, if the results of the decisions or resource hoarding, if the result of that have negative effects on students of color, then we are operating within white supremacy and racist, and so it's like, it's just, we need our kiddos who we need our kiddos of color to be a priority, and I did not see that last night. It was very disappointing.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, as a quick send off, we know the next few dates of contract negotiations that are supposed to take place from 6 to 8. Now that the school year has started, it'll be happening from 6 to 8 on September 9th. And then they'll have a few more dates after that. And so check us out September 9th. We'll have a recap the day after. So I hope you follow along, because this is one of the most important conversations.
That's right.
The education of our students. So I hope you join us for our next watch party, or you get a chance to watch on your own, whatever, but make sure you're paying attention. But thank you all for listening. Heather, thank you for doing this recap with me again. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Bye.